as a working class musician, like not someone who is reaping the benefits of the pop world, right? The thing I have that I'm proud of, that I can stand on, is my songs. And the idea that these songs that were very important to me and I feel like still resonate with me would never be played again made me sad.
Serve the people. Anyone want to know? They don't serve the people. Keeping everything under control.
Welcome to This Broken Mixtape, the podcast that rewinds and presses play on the soundtrack to your life. I'm Jeff Wu.
And I'm Justin Lee.
Happy New Year and welcome back. This is episode 1 of season 3 and our first for 2019. Over the past 15 years, Dan Boeckner has become a well-known fixture of the North American indie rock scene. As one of the main members of Wolf Parade, Operators, Divine Fits, and the now-defunct Handsome Furs, he shows no signs of slowing down with new Operators and Wolf Parade albums set for release this year. We caught up with Dan before the sold-out Operators Presents Handsome Furs show to discuss the personal and technical logistics of performing Handsome Furs material live, being bullied as a young teenager on Vancouver Island, and the surprising merits of Netflix's Riverdale and chilling adventures of Sabrina.
So we're here with our special guest, Dan Boeckner, and you know Dan from Operators, Wolf Parade, Handsome Furs, Divine Fits, the list goes on and on. Thank you for being on our show, Dan.
Thanks for having me, man.
So first off, I just want to kind of jump into Operator stuff, obviously. I heard that the album, it's finished?
It just needs vocals,
okay.
and then it's done. So,
okay, and so do you guys have kind of a time frame for it?
Yeah, we don't have an exact date, but it's going to be sometime between the middle of April and the beginning of May.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it'll be like between April 15th and like May 10th or something like that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what can we expect from that record sound-wise?
It is pretty different than the last record that we made. And I think the band just kind of evolved. Like Blue Wave was really informed by post-punk, and especially working with Graham Walsh, who did, the Preoccupations records and Mets. Mm-hmm. There was a very, the band went in a very post-punk direction, I felt like, on that record. Like, it was very dark, and it was abrasive, and there was a lot of sort of propulsive kind of guitar stuff ended up on the record. And this record is more old, like very old, late 60s, early 70s synth-based.
Interesting. Okay.
Live drums on, almost all of the songs, but there are some songs that are, just basically drum machine and these bubbling synths. And I don't know, if I could describe it as anything, it would be like a sort of pastoralism that didn't really that wasn't really part of the artistic mix in Blue Wave. So I grew up in a very rural community, and I think a lot of that kind of seeped into this record. These sort of more organic synthesizer sounds, like uncontrolled sort of pastoral organic synth sounds. But the record is also pretty dark, so when I was writing it, a lot of the songs, the songs are almost reflections on different potential apocalypses. So, a climate apocalypse. There's a song, I read this book called Modern, which is a underground 1970s sci-fi novel that was published between 1955 and the late 70s in a group of short stories. And no one really knew it was connected when it was being written, but basically it's about the world being completely encased in plastic and people becoming transhuman. It's almost like a proto-cyberpunk novel. And that made a huge impact on me. So we had this instrumental that I was really into. It sort of sounded like early Roxy music, and that song is now written from the perspective of that particular transhumanist, like post-singularity apocalypse. So there's that, and then there is another song called "Low Life" that I wrote with Boeckner in about one afternoon, and then we were just jamming, and it was just basically a very Atari bit crushed, tiny little keyboard, and some floating sort of Oberheim patches and this really like clunky drum machine. We wrote it, and I thought as soon as we were writing it, I was like, okay, there's something here. And a couple days later, we went into the studio with Tim Kingsbury from Arcade Fire, showed him the song a couple of times. He played bass on it, and we tracked it live. And when it was done, I was like, okay, this song is the song that encompasses all the feelings on the record. So I think it's going to be the last song on the album.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean that's a little window into it.
Yeah. No, we're looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think most of our listeners will know of all your projects, but to give a little bit of context, maybe you could talk about, especially tonight's show and the show that you did in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
You're playing all Handsome Furs stuff, which, like, for people like Jeff and I, is like a real treat for any Handsome Furs fan, obviously.
Yeah.
Tell us what led you to this decision, and the whole thought process behind it.
Well, all right. Handsome Furs stopped being a band when my marriage to Alexi, my partner in that band, and my ex-wife now, ended abruptly in 2012. And once the sort of emotional garbage cloud of that very, very painful breakup settled, I missed playing those songs. I missed being able to perform them live because, and maybe it's not cool to say, but it's the truth. The songs that I wrote for Handsome Furs I think they document, and this is maybe selfish, but they document my evolution as a person, not just as a musician, more than anything else I've written before or since. When I wrote Plague Park, it was directly following writing Apologies, and I was still dealing with two really huge elements of my, what would go on to, I think, shape my character and the way I think, which was leaving this crappy rural community and leaving a very isolated, insular scene in Vancouver Island to come to Montreal, which is a cosmopolitan city. There's not such a monoculture, it's like, which was a strange transition and really, saved my life in a lot of ways. And I was also dealing with the death of my mother, which was sudden and fairly traumatic for everyone. I worked a lot of that out in the Apologies record, but I also still was dealing with it, processing it in Plague Park. So Plague Park is kind of an outlier for the Handsome Furs albums. Then we toured Plague Park, and we went to all these places that I had always wanted to go to, mostly in Eastern Europe. Like I get to go to Moscow, Serbia, Croatia, and that had been my thing that I was studying in university, like political science and history. And those tours for Plague Park completely rewired my brain politically. I realized it kind of uncentered my thinking. I'd had a very neoliberal, with the emphasis on the liberal education in a Western university. And as soon as I got to somewhere like Serbia and started making friends with people there and asking them questions and getting to know what their life was like, these are people I'm still very good friends. They became some of my longest best friends. So as soon as I got back off those tours, I was completely politically restructured. Like the idea of Western centric political worldview was just flushed out of my head. So it was good for me. It was like taking medicine And that was the most inspiring thing creatively that I think that's ever happened in my life. So I started writing Face Control, and then, that we toured that record, went back to a lot of those places and had a following. We got to go to China, Southeast Asia, Myanmar, South America, and that kind of re-energized the process again. So we're writing about, people we met there. And musically I was being exposed to things that I would have never been interested in listening to or been exposed to otherwise. Mm-hmm. So there was this sort of accelerated creative growth in that time, and then the band stopped. So that's why this band is important to me and why I wanted to play the songs again. It represents a huge chunk of my life and artistic and personal development. Mm-hmm. And the decisions going into making it were, it wasn't easy. I was pretty resistant to the idea of playing any of these songs, even 3 or 4 years ago.
Right.
But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, as a working class musician, like not someone who is reaping the benefits of the pop world, right? The thing I have that I'm proud of, that I can stand on, is my songs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the idea that these songs that were very important to me and I feel like still resonate with me would never be played again made me sad. So
mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, did you reach out to Alexi?
I did. Yeah, I did. I wrote her an email in September. These shows got put together the idea for the shows were put together in August, and then our booking agents kind of decided, okay, what are the 2 best places we could play, given that we live in Montreal, and it would probably be a drive. And it was obviously Toronto was number 1, and then New York. Mm-hmm. And I reached out to her and I wrote, just a paraphrase, I basically, and I also wrote something on Twitter to this effect, like publicly saying, like, look, we're doing these shows to the public. Like, if you come to these shows, you're not going to see Handsome Furs. Mm-hmm. That band died in 2012, mm-hmm. Like that live experience, 50% of the live experience was Alexi's performance on stage. Mm-hmm. But if you do come to the show, what you will get to see and hear is our Handsome Furs songs, kind of reformatted. Mm-hmm. So I wrote her and I basically said, look, we're doing these shows and we want to represent you, or I would like to represent you in, any way that you want. She recently published a book of poetry a couple of years ago. Our fans have always been interested in her writing. Mm-hmm. I thought there was a way that we could, do it together and give her a voice in this sort of representation of the songs, but she never wrote me back. So I never heard from her, and that was essentially it.
Mm-hmm. And I know Now reached out for a comment from her, and that was included in that article that went up this week.
Yeah, and I understand what she's saying, but in that comment, but that comment doesn't mention the fact that I reached out to her and said, how would you like to be represented,
right,
in these shows?
Yeah,
and then there was no response.
Right.
So, performing these songs live, I understand, and she has a point about erasure, right? Mm-hmm. But she has a point about erasure in the broader context. That is a problem, but she was asked how she wanted to be represented, and didn't write back. So. Mm-hmm. And there's also the fact that, the bulk of the creative output on the music side was me. So I wrote the songs, I wrote the lyrics, I wrote the programming. And Handsome Furs as a band would not exist if it wasn't for her. If it wasn't for our collaboration, You know, it was the combination of her artistic input and aesthetic input, and definitely the performances, which is why it's Operators Presents Handsome Furs. It's not Handsome Furs. You know, we're playing the songs. So
how is that whole process? Because you did the Brooklyn show a couple of days ago, and to play those songs now, and like you said, they're reformatted, but you know they come. I'm sure there's some sort of, I don't want to say painful, but there's, you know, it obviously is a reminder of that time, and not to say it was all bad, but how do you feel about that?
It's interesting because going back and performing these songs, relearning the lyrics, you know, there are so many lyrics that used to be just muscle memory and are now, I have to, you know, in the 2 weeks rehearsals leading up to this, I had lyrics genius in front of my microphone. And and you know, lyrics genius is, I'd say, about 60% right. So
Yeah.
So I mean, it was interesting, like accessing that, and some of it. I feel like, you know, some of the stuff I wrote even at the time, even with the Sound Capital stuff, I've been. How do I explain this? If I was writing about a place that I had been to for, let's say, 4 days, where I had played a show and really dug down into where I was, you know, with the promoter rep or opening bands, you know, gone to their houses, hung out in town with them, and I was filled with inspiration and ideas, and I wrote these songs, and looking back on them, there are a few bits where I'm like, these, if I'm writing about somebody I've kept in touch with, I look back on them and I'm like, oh, this is a little over, you know. I didn't really know what I was talking about. I was just really excited. Like, I talked to my friend Darko from Myanmar about this a year ago, and I was like, you know, some of those lyrics I wrote, like, I'm sorry if that's if I was sort of going over the top, you know.
But that's kind of the whole thing when you're younger. Yeah, you're a little bit naive, and you know, you're experiencing things for the first time. Yeah, so you're sometimes gonna idealize certain things. Yeah, and, you know,
and I do stand by the lyrics because they are definitely a explanation. You know, they're a very honest explication of what I was feeling at the time and what I experienced. So that was strange. Finding a way to reconnect with those songs, even if the political idea of them made me slightly uncomfortable, you know, just a little bit. And then, you know, obviously a lot of those songs were written in the center of this marriage, in the confines of this marriage, and I had to think about that a lot, and I had some peace with it. It felt good. On the technical side, it was insane trying to put all this stuff together. Devoika did the bulk of the work. I didn't have any of the MIDI files or anything for any of the songs. Most of the Handsome Furs stuff was composed on a very unloved sequencer synthesizer, the Electribe EMX, which was Korg's, like, if you wanted to make techno on a budget in your basement, you know, I love it. But as we were going, well, she did the bulk of the work, and then I was kind of going over it as we were trying to get the sort of finer strokes down. I realized I was like, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just twisting knobs and just hoping, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. But to try and recreate a mistake or naivety on a device is hard.
Yeah.
So we, you know, she did. I think she did a great job, and then, you know, we kind of fine-tuned it together. And then we brought it to Sam and started rehearsing with live drums, which was a whole other thing because there were no drums in Handsome Furs. There was no drum kit.
And how does that change the whole dynamic on stage? I mean, you know, you're going from like 2 people to 3, and you know, with the live drums, obviously will completely change the sound of it.
Absolutely, yeah. So we, you know, Sam and Devoika worked to kind of pull out certain elements of the rhythm section that Sam would be playing live, and then I found a very old sample bank of all the drum patches from the EMX and loaded it into his drum pad. Okay. So or at least loaded some of the drum patches into his drum pad, you know. And then the stage dynamic too is, you know, it's like the stage dynamic of Handsome Furs was just kind of chaos and very personal. Whereas this is like, you know, you've got 3 people on stage. It's a band. So, but we played the show in Brooklyn 2 days ago and the night before last, and people kind of went nuts. So it felt good. It felt, yeah.
So, you know, just in terms of just being a fan of music.
Yeah.
When you're, you know, have, you know, specific songs and albums that are connected to people, ex-partners, are you the type of person that is able to listen to those songs and, or, you know, there's people that are like, I can never hear this album again because it's too painful. Because I'm wondering, I mean, it's one thing to create this music and play it live with somebody else, but how are you just as a listener, as a fan?
I'm okay with it. You know, I think if I was a teenager, it would be, you know, if I had teenage emotions, I would feel differently. But I think it's good to reflect on relationships and, you know, in the medium of a song. It's good to revisit that because it's really easy to move on from something that was the center of your life and only remember the bad things and kind of encase yourself in this protective shell of, you know, remembering things maybe differently than they were. And that in itself, like getting real with that is also sort of a painful process. But I think I think in the end it's good because if you're able to look back at that time and see it in a clear light, whoever around you that you love in your life, you're gonna be better to them. You know, hopefully you're gonna learn from your mistakes, or remember things that you felt like you did right. You know.
Let's talk a little bit about, you know, just your being a fan of music, listening to music. So growing up in the house, what kind of stuff would your parents be playing? What would you hear?
I remember like being really young and my parents having great taste in music because my mom was a dancer. She was like she danced for the Royal Winnipeg briefly, and then she had a community dance company in Cowichan Lake, which is pretty funny. Like it's kind of like it's like the Waiting for Guffman movie.
Okay.
Like, yeah, she worked with the local theater. Okay. But she was very much into disco stuff, which would have been from her youth, and then the contemporary stuff in the 80s that she loved was like any of the sort of Janet Jackson, like Control and Rhythm Nation was on constantly at the house. And then on the other side was she loved CNC Music Factory too.
Yeah.
And KLF.
Big tracks.
KLF
she introduced me to
the
KLF. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah.
And I don't think she knew any of the like Bill Drummond's like Burning a Million Pounds or any of that stuff. But I remember being, you know, a teenager and coming upstairs and being like, what the hell are you listening to? This is awesome. And then for my dad, he had great music when I was younger, or great taste in music when I was younger. It was kind of the classic, like, stoner hippie stuff. But something happened to him in the 80s where he kept following his favorite artists. And there's a terrible period in the 80s of, you know, just the worst Bob Dylan records.
Right.
You know, all the guys from the Eagles making, like, maudlin, coked out ballads on FM synths, like... So he went down the wrong path, I feel like. Yeah.
And do you remember the first album that you bought on your own?
Yeah, I do. I bought oh man, I bought Sepultura Arise, I think.
Wow.
Maybe Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction before that, actually.
How old were you when you bought that record?
Arise or Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction came out when? Like
88, right?
88?
I think so.
I think 87.
87?
87?
Yeah, I think.
I'm going to... You might be right. I don't know.
It must have been 88, right?
Okay.
So I was 10. So that was definitely the first record I ever bought.
Okay.
And then, yeah, Sepultura would have been later. Mainly, I got my music from my friend Emmett, whose older brother was a weed dealer and had amazing taste in metal.
Okay.
So Guns N' Roses was like a gateway drug to metal. And before that, I just listened to what my parents listened to and pop. So getting into metal was huge for me. And then from metal, I got into punk music, or like, you know, like the 90s, sort of like Sonic Youth. And from that, I got into local music. And once I discovered that like there were local bands on the island who were playing like post-punk or post-hardcore, I guess, bands like Unwound from just south of the border, who were closer to a lot of those bands were just a little older than me, so they would have been just out of high school. That blew my mind. Like I was like, that's all I want to listen to. I just want to listen to independent local stuff. And you know, a lot of those bands were terrible, but I loved them. I would buy everything. If it was local, I would buy it. I would listen. I would wear it out. If I didn't like it at first, I would assume that I wasn't hearing it right, so I would just keep listening to it until I found something I liked. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Well, I read this thing where you would occasionally, as a teenager, would walk around the forest and listen to Aphex Twin.
Yeah, that was a big. Selected Ambient Works too was a huge record for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, like, because I mean, you said that living in that environment in BC wasn't probably the most interesting or whatnot, but I mean, did that must have sort of planted the seed or helped you creatively? Just because I feel like a lot of great musicians come from shitty towns. And where there's not a whole lot to do, and you kind of have to just, you know, sort of expand your creativity.
Yeah, I mean, and it was a defense mechanism too, because in the small town like that, I mean, it was very, the atmosphere in that town was a mix between almost libertarian hippies, and pure rednecks, like not a kind of commodified American redneck culture that's kind of been sold back to Canadians, like the Alberta idea of like big trucks and country music. Like,
right, that's where I'm from, so I know very well.
Like, and it also kind of came up to the island too after I left. Like, it's very weird to go back there and see rednecks like sort of cosplaying American redneck,
right?
Yeah. You know, but the pure kind of Canadian, psychotic, small town, desperate, psychotic redneck, like that, those were the people that I grew up with. And my friends were a really weird collection of like punks and like goths and a couple of the two like very closeted queer kids in my school. And we got brutalized in high school. Like, I had my jaw broken when I was a teenager by a guy who was probably 10 or 15 years older than me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What happened there?
I was walking back from band practice, and Couch and Lake is basically a ring. It's a circle. And these dudes, the classic thing is these dudes in trucks would drive by and scream faggot at, you know, whoever they thought was the quote-unquote faggot, which was me and my friend. They drove by. We gave them the finger. They drove all the way around town, which took about, 5 minutes. There's one road. And they came back up. They got out of the truck, and they just beat the shit out of us. Like, these are, like, grown-ass men, like, in their mid-20s beating up teenagers. Yeah. So that environment really pushed me to... I felt like it was like a fucking culture war, you know? Like, I wanted to hang out with my friends. I wanted to meet new people. I wanted to make music. I wanted to be creative, and I felt like I had to fight for that in that environment. I think it's changed with the internet. I think the internet has kind of leveled out a lot of that really bizarre tribalism that happened in the 90s. It almost seems antiquated now, like a high school movie.
Yeah,
I don't know, because I'm not in high school, but I imagine that, you know, that thing has kind of been leveled out in places like my hometown. But at the time, it was very tribal and it was very violent. And I tell people, you know, about the place I grew up, and they, you know, younger people, you know, they're kind of surprised. Like, you know, these are guys who like would go to jail for murder, like, you know, would overdose on crack when they got fired from their forestry job, or like, you know, just walk into the woods and disappear. Mm-hmm. So my whole the end of my high school days were focused on spending as much time away from town as possible with people that I thought were being creative, who were progressive, and I felt like it was, I felt like it was, you know, it was a war. I had to be on that side, you know.
Mm-hmm. And then so you moved to Montreal for school?
No, I couldn't afford to keep myself in school on Vancouver Island because it was getting really expensive to live there, and the type of work that I was doing, which was kitchen work, was being like there were no jobs and the pay was terrible. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't sustain both playing music, having a job, and being in school. So I kind of chose music. I went on a brief tour, came back, and then basically my mom passed away, and I was like, I need to get out of here. Mm-hmm. I moved to Montreal. Spencer was already there. Arlen was already there. My friend Chad Jones was there, recording with Constellation Records, and you know, I just felt like it was like the promised land. So,
speaking of Spencer, so you know, you guys, as our listeners should know, Wolf Parade kind of went on hiatus. Was it 2010? Was the last?
Yeah, that's right.
And then you reformed a few years ago.
Yeah.
And put out a great album, did a lot of shows.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what happened there with sort of, you know, I thought was going to be the end of Wolf Parade. Fortunately, it wasn't. But what?
Well, we, you know, around the time we put Expo out, everybody was a little burnt out, and I was feeling like Handsome Furs, in particular, like every time I go on tour with that band, it felt better to me in a lot of ways. It was more positive. Whereas I think a lot of the members of Wolf Parade, when we would go out to tour, you know, do these pre-Expo tours or the post-album release tour, we were managing ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of work. We were a self-managed band, but we were playing like 2,000 cap rooms, mm-hmm. and it would just ground everybody down. So everybody was really raw. And I never stopped touring. I would do a Wolf Parade tour and then go out for like 6 weeks with Handsome Furs. Mm-hmm. So I was really ground down. Mm-hmm. And we just had a point on a European tour where we all got together and we're like, we gotta take a break. Like, otherwise we're just not going to be friends anymore.
Right.
And I think it was definitely the right move. Because those guys are like my brothers, you know.
Mm-hmm. And so, is there still plans to make another album to continue?
Yeah. A couple weeks ago, actually, before I was doing rehearsals for this, we started writing the 5th record on Vancouver Island. We've got a studio rented, so we're recording over the winter, and then we'll be releasing the record hopefully this fall. Is what we're shooting for.
Amazing.
Okay. So yeah.
I mean, with Wolf Parade still being around, still making new music, this Handsome Furs. Operators playing Handsome Furs show. Any chances of seeing a Divine Fits, another album, or more shows?
I would love that. You know, I talked to Britt like a couple weeks ago, or actually just last week, because he was going to come to the New York show, and we were just reminiscing about how fun that band was.
Like, I saw it was the very first show in Montreal, right?
Yeah.
Where you played.
It was offsite Osheaga.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. It was
killer.
That was so awesome.
Man, that show was a blast. And we also played here on the album tour, or like on the pre tour for the album. It was really cool. I think we did Lee's and then came out to Montreal.
I went to the Lee's show as well. Yeah.
Sam almost didn't make it because he forgot his passport when we were in LA and had to fly back to Columbus and then like drive up basically.
Oh, okay.
So,
yeah. So there is some hopes for more material there. Okay.
Yeah. I think with this year I'm going to be pretty busy with
it sounds like
operators and operators and Wolf Parades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I heard this crazy story about when you first toured. Well, you played CMJ as Wolf Parade back in 2005, and it was a drunken adventure. If you could sort of recall and tell us that story, if you don't mind.
We had started a tour with a support tour with Arcade Fire. So we drove from Montreal to Denver but it takes, I think, about 24 hours to straight driving, maybe 26 hours to drive from Montreal to Denver. And we basically left it so late that we had to get in the van, and we had roughly 26 hours before we were supposed to be on stage.
Oh, wow.
So we just drove without stopping. And then we drove straight to San Francisco, played a couple of shows with Arcade Fire, and then they put us on a plane. And none of us had really been on a plane very much. I mean, we're very anyway, that's fun. It's funny to think that, there was a time in my life where I didn't fly ever. So we got on a plane, flew to New York, landed in New York, just got, we were just young and stupid and just started drinking. We got in a fight with a photographer from NME, which pretty much tanked our career in England right off the bat.
What happened there?
He was taking pictures of us, and in retrospect, he was just doing his job. The woman that they had interviewing us was asking us how we liked being at CMJ, and so far it had gone pretty poorly. We were used to doing these DIY shows, and I just felt like we didn't get wristbands. We couldn't go see any of the shows. It was a classic festival experience.
Yeah.
It's not for bands. It's for middle management to go, spend their 1 week of the year where they get to do coke with their friends and go crazy. But we didn't know that. We thought we were going to go see all our favorite bands in New York City. So we were kind of like, this sucks. Like, this is gross. So she asked us how we liked it, and we were very honest with her, and she got upset. And she turned her tape recorder off and said, "What I want to hear you say is that you're having a great time at CMJ." And that did not go over well with the band. So, and again, if that had happened to me now, I would have maybe dealt with it in a more, I don't know. Actually, it was just pretty lame all around. So that happened. Then we played a show, and then I somehow, I got very, very drunk. Chad Van Galen was responsible for getting me apocalyptically drunk before the show. And the Constantines, too. I'll put the blame on Doug from the Constantines. Yeah. And Emily from the Metric.
Yeah, I heard that was your first time meeting her, and you ended up at some...
Well, I kind of blacked out after the show, and then ended up... When I came to consciousness, I was at a Lebanese restaurant with her. Alone, and I was just like, what the fuck is happening? What am I doing here? It was great, though. It was still probably one of the best weekends of my life.
Yeah.
So
that's almost time for us, but I just want to sort of mention, I think it was just it was this past Halloween.
Yeah.
You and Boeckner dressed up as Jughead and Archie from the Riverdale series.
We sure did. Yeah.
And I got to know, are you a fan of that show?
I am a fan of that show.
Okay.
She has watched more of it than I have, but I love that show, and I'm also maybe a little less of a fan, but still a fan of the Sabrina show that the producers
I watched the first episode. It's great.
Solid.
Yeah,
it's really solid. It takes some weird detours, but I think I'm like 4 or 5 episodes in, but I really like that too.
Yeah,
I think those shows are great. I love Riverdale is such an amazing combination of inept script writing, but just enough weird sub David Lynchian shit to keep you interested.
Yeah.
And it's trashy.
I don't like how they made Jughead so emo, and he's not at all the Jughead that we grew up on. So
yeah,
it's an interpretation.
It's artistic license. This is like the Archie extended universe almost. Yeah, it's like alternate universe Archie.
I'm completely up to date.
Are you up to date?
Yeah.
I love that show.
Yeah.
I love it. I think the acting is amazing on it because it's totally a lot of it is just completely over the top and yeah.
I feel the same way about Riverdale as I do about Sons of Anarchy.
Totally. Yes.
It's like there's no way that would happen. Are you kidding?
Sons of Anarchy is one of the greatest shows ever, but not for the reasons that the creators think it is.
Yeah, exactly.
It unintentionally just nails this specific type of dude who's a moron. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're supposed to like Jax, right?
Yeah.
He gets, he's constantly getting people killed.
Yeah.
And he's an idiot. His whole thing is like honor and like, yeah, sir, I object, sir.
Yeah,
like,
my dad. This.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a guy. It's an archetype, a male archetype that has totally risen to the forefront in Trump's America.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, Sons of Anarchy is an incredible unintentional documentary of that. Like this proto just dipshit, you know?
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Dan, and looking forward to. Well, I can't make it to the show, but Jeff
Yeah, I'm
is going
totally
tonight.
looking forward to it tonight.
Thank you, guys.
You've been listening to Season 3, Episode 1 of This Broken Mixtape with Dan Boeckner of the bands Operators and Wolf Parade, to name a few. If you haven't already, visit thisbrokenmixtape.com to check out this episode's Spotify playlist. There you'll also find all of our past interviews and custom illustrations for each show. If you enjoyed this episode, please take the time to subscribe, rate, and share our podcast wherever you're tuning into us today. Also, if you have any comments, feedback, or ideas for guests, feel free to drop us a line through our website, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find all our episodes on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, and Spotify. As always, thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. Cheers.